I was approached by Glenys Howarth, who at the time was head of Department of Social and Policy Sciences. And she of course, is a renowned scholar in the field of death and society. And it was her idea entirely. And because she was head of department, she was in a good position to say, I'd like to do this, and the university gave her the opportunity. I think I was probably the first person that she approached, and indeed she and I sat on the appointment panel for Professor Tony Walter, who quite soon became another member, and of course is now the esteemed director of the centre. Glenys and I talked with the funeral directing industry body, and they were persuaded to support us for the first 5 years. And that helped to pay for the professorship of Death and Society.
I first came to the Center for Death and Society and the University of Bath, actually, in 2005 for the Death, Dying, and Disposal Conference. The funniest part to me about the start, I've never forgotten this, was at one point, while I was really stressed out about working on my PhD dissertation, I emailed Glenys Howarth, who was then the director of the center, and saying, you know, gosh, I'd really like to come to this conference, but I'm a poor PhD student, I don't have any money, I don't think I can, so I'm really sorry. And then Glenys emailed me back and said, that's okay, as long as you can get here, you won't have to pay anything for the conference. So then suddenly I really had to go because I didn't have an excuse, like I didn't have any money. That was the opening of the Center for Death and Society in 2005 at that particular conference. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I'd really like to work here. Like, this would be a great place to work. So that was how that all that sort of started. And then I went back to the States and started, doing other things and working, but stayed in touch with everyone around the center. And it took about 3 years, but then finally in 2008, I got here through Research Council's Academic Fellows Program. So it's kind of a postdoc-ish kind of thing, but then after that it became a permanent position, which is what I have now.
I've been part of Center for Death and Society for the past 4 years. In fact, it was this very center that guided my steps to University of Bath. My research interest evolved around the concept of social death. But the greatest opportunity that I've been granted was to submit a proposal for 2014 annual conference, which I suggested to be on social death. And I was thrilled when my proposal was accepted by members of CDAS. However, as a result of this conference, Tony Walter and I have been approached by the journal called Contemporary Social Science with an offer to publish a special issue on social death. Building my confidence then motivated me to participate in a Southwest Doctoral Training Center poster competition in which I was awarded first prize. Yet another example of the support provided by members of CDAS presents our participation in bidding for grant to carry out a public engagement project, which Renske Vizier and I won. We were very proud. We ran a workshop at the Oldfield Park Friendly Club in Bath, where retired people meet weekly to share their time together. This not only provided an exceptional opportunity to facilitate meaningful conversations and mutual knowledge exchange, but also an occasion to discuss matters of death and dying.
I've known about CDAS ever since I was a doctoral student myself, and I was doing that at the University of Durham under Professor Douglas Davis, and he felt it was necessary I attend a conference called DDD at Bath. And I was like, well, what's DDD? And he went, Death, Dying and Disposal. And I was like, disposal. I was all right with the death and the dying, but the disposal bit, I just thought that is weird. And I'll never forget Karen Staley handing me my sort of conference delegates pack. Inside the delegates pack was a Sudoku, but instead of the numbers 1 to 9, it was the letters for cremation. And I just thought, what is this world that I've joined? Yeah, and I just felt it was bizarre, and had no idea that a few years down the line I'd be doing quite a bit of work with CDAS and a member of the CDAS team. So my first piece of work with CDAS was to deliver 2 modules on the funeral services degree programme, which was great fun. Then Kate Woodthorpe approached me about getting involved with her to do some research. It was a project where we were looking at what we came to refer to as funeral poverty, but we were interested in finding out how individuals or families cope with having to organise and pay for a funeral if they just don't have credit. Then Kate invited me to work with her on another project immediately after. And there we were interested in how people who were retired were thinking about, if indeed they thought about it at all, the kind of finances of their later life.
CDAS provides a really supportive and stimulating context for my work. There's a real sense of belonging and community. Some colleagues call us a death squad, and I am very proud to be part of it.
What's so unique about the Center for Death and Society, or unique about its global positioning, is that there's just not really any other place to do the kind of work that I've been doing here anywhere. And ironically enough, for me, I actually do more work now back in America around death and dying since coming here than I ever did in America.
So those are the projects that I've done with CDAS. So some of it's teaching, some of it's doing research and publications, and then Dead and Buried with Charlotte, which is just, you know, the most interesting dynamic thing I'd say I've done in my academic career. So the idea was that essentially we would encourage young people who were at the time identified and categorised as not being in education, employment or training. We'd engage them on a creative arts project which brings in all Charlotte's skills, but thinking about places of death and thinking about death and bereavement. And so we had a field trip right at the beginning where we took the young people to a cemetery, crematorium and natural burial grounds, and then the whole point of the project was after 7 or 8 weeks they was to have produced a creative response to that visit, facilitated by Charlotte and led by Charlotte and all her sort of creative expertise.
I hadn't done anything on death before, so for me it was a really fascinating subject, and particularly about engaging young people on the subject, which I hadn't done before. So yeah, it was kind of getting them to sort of start to feel a bit more comfortable in their surroundings. So, you know, and actually some of them hadn't had any arts experience before. Actually, quite a lot of the young people had some experience of bereavement before, and actually we realised that, you know, pretty early on that was going to be quite a common denominator between them all. And so we had to kind of be sensitive to that as well. And then and the whole I mean, what I loved about
they designed the gallery space really, didn't they, as well, which was incredible. They learnt about how to
hang an exhibition.
Yeah.
I mean, and also just, I mean, I loved, you know, the whole of CDAS.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember just thinking, God, it would be so, because after being a freelancer for so long and then suddenly working with, you know, a group like CDAS, like actually how everyone just mucks in, you know, they massively mucked in, and it was just so nice to have a group of people just mucking in on the last minute.
In a way, it sort of felt a bit like a CDAS wedding, really.
What CDAS does is to look at the whole experience of death and dying everywhere throughout history, into the future, how the experience of dying has changed over time, is changing now, and will certainly change in the future. And I think what CDAS does is stand right back from death and dying.
I can't blame you for thinking a good boat for me is one that is sinking.